Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli waj'al li waziran min ahli. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Um, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the first of, I guess, a series of videos that I'm going to do about Islam and the ancient mysteries. As you probably know, Islam and the Ancient Mysteries, Volume 1, the Mystery Schools, was published in June of 2023. And this is the first volume of a series that I'll be doing about the relationship between the mystery schools, the Sabiun or the Sabians in the Qur'an, and Islam. And volume 1 is really the continuation of this, it's the continuation of the thesis that I did on a similar topic, which is entitled Interpretatio Islamica and the Unraveling of the Ancient Sabian Mysteries, which I did for a master's degree at an American university in Cairo. So before I really get into the book, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about myself. So my name is Maurice Hines. I'm an author, an educator, librarian, community servant, and many other things. As you can see from this slide, I hold 3 master's degrees. The first one is in Arabic language, which I obtained from Khartoum International Institute of Arabic Language in Sudan. I also have a master's degree in library and information science with a specialization on archival science. And then the last degree that I did, which is the one where I did my thesis, was in Arab and Islamic civilizations at the American University in Cairo. So I have a strong background in Arabic language, Islamic texts, particularly historical texts, religious texts, and things of that nature. I was also an Arabic instructor for several years, several universities. And I also worked as a librarian and archivist for several years, where I taught information literacy, research writing, and things of that nature. And I'm also the author of other books like Oral Histories for Muslim Communities, Thoughts from Sudan, and I'm embarking on this the Islam and the Ancient Mysteries series, and I'm also the author of the Maurchives blog and an Arabic language blog, Turjuman al-Asr. So, I guess in writing my my book and my thesis, and if you read any of the blog, you know that I'm challenging, um, I guess, a lot of different things. Particularly, I see myself as, a member of the conscious community, which, in African American communities, as Afrocentric or, just conscious or woke or whatever you want to call it nowadays. But I'm challenging them actually to develop their knowledge. Because I think one thing that they lack is that, they're stuck on in a certain mindset that is stuck in history. Really the 1900s. They haven't really caught up to date. And even though they have a lot of traction on the internet, just for, I guess popularity reasons or whatever it may be. Um, their scholarship is, 0 to nil. Um, and I'm also championing um, the Sunni Muslims, the Orthodox Muslims, um, as a member of this community. Um, and it's long since been the case that African American Muslims have been the vanguard of the Black conscious movement, uh, historically, religiously, politically. We know a lot of the real revolutionaries from the 60s, 70s, and beyond were Muslims, and they still are Muslims. However, for some reason, maybe because of money, certain nefarious groups supporting them behind the scenes, which I've uncovered on my blog a little bit, um, they have kind of ousted the African American Muslim community. And, I just see myself as playing a role in sort of bringing us back to that, back to our rightful place in that community, and also really developing the scholarship, bringing the scholarship up a notch, up a several notches, hopefully, inshallah. So, if we're looking at my book, Islam and Ancient Mysteries, Volume One, I'm really making a few claims here. Um, the first one is a historical argument that the Sabians are connected to the mystery schools that we know of, ancient Greece and Rome, and it's also connected with the ancient religion of Egypt, as well as Persia and other places in the Near East, including Arabia. And I'm also kind of making a theoretical argument that there is um, sort of a dichotomy between what we know as Sabianism and Hanifism. This will come later. And I also have a polemical argument, which I just touched on, that there are these modern mystery schools or attempts to recreate the mystery schools, or there are modern Sabians among us. And I'll get to that later. So, to begin, starting off with a historical argument about Sabians being equated with the mystery schools of the ancient world. Really, I start this discussion with George G.M. James and his Stolen Legacy. If you're not familiar with this book, Stolen Legacy, Greek Philosophy is Stolen Egyptian Philosophy. It was written by um, a Guyanese American scholar by the name of George Granville Mona James. Um, and I believe his final position was at uh, an HBCU in Arkansas, in Pine Bluff, I believe. And so, back in, I think this book is published in 1954. And, some people say he dies mysteriously after publishing this book, although the evidence for it really isn't there. But he does die off following the publishing of this book. Um, and of course, it's been criticized quite a bit. So it's sort of a pivotal work of Afrocentric scholarship. And it really makes a claim that, um, as the subtitle suggests, that what we know as Greek philosophy actually has its origins in ancient Egypt. And this is his argument throughout the book. Um, it's been criticized by anti-Afrocentric authors, many in academia, uh, on several grounds. Um, but quite personally, I've read some of these criticisms, and these criticisms all pick up they pick at the peripheries of his argument, but they don't really attack the meat of his argument um, that there was some exchange between the Greeks and the Romans, and I mean not the Greeks and the Romans, but the Greeks, Romans, and the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, um, with Egypt being having the upper hand, so to speak. Um, and of course, there's no doubt in my mind that the ancient Egyptian civilization was populated by dark-skinned people, and it still is, really, to this day. I lived in Egypt for several years, and the places that we know to be associated with, these temples and hieroglyphics, the height of ancient Egyptian civilization, actually are in the south of the country, where the majority of the population is dark skinned or Nubians. So there's no doubt in my mind about that. But I start off with this quote from him. During the Persian, Greek, and Roman invasions, large numbers of Egyptians fled not only to the desert and mountain regions, but also to adjacent lands in Africa, Arabia, and Asia Minor, where they lived and secretly developed the teachings which belonged to their mystery system. In the 8th century AD, the Moors, i.e., natives of Mauritania in North Africa, invaded Spain and took with them the Egyptian culture which they had preserved. Knowledge in the ancient days was centralized, i.e., it belonged to a common parent and system, i.e., the wisdom teaching or mysteries of Egypt, which the Greeks used to call Sophia. So this is an interesting quote, because he talks about a phenomenon. Um, you know, the Greeks and Romans, particularly, the Romans invading Egypt, particularly over religious conflicts. And then the people from those lands migrating deeper into the interior of Africa, Arabia, Asia Minor, which is current day Turkey, Iraq, that area. Um, and then he sort of skips over about 1,000 years of history. Um, he takes you from the 8th century and then goes, I guess into the time that um, Spain and much of southern Europe was populated by Muslims, which he calls Moors. We can get to that controversy later on, but he's really skipping over the history of Islam. So what I did is really I went into a lot of the primary texts in Arabic, and I looked at that history and saw what happened between the 8th century and the time that you know um, the Moors supposedly passed this knowledge into Europe. So just a little bit of a background about mystery schools. Um, so a mystery school is really probably in our common everyday life nowadays, we will understand it as simply a university. Okay, universities where people go to attain specialized knowledge, certain things, uh, maybe even to become movers and shakers within the society. And this is no different. The mystery schools was no different. Um, However, because knowledge wasn't as widespread as it was back in those days, there's also a religious component. And many universities also, have some sort of religious component. If not now, then most definitely, in the past. So the word mystery is actually derived from the word mysterion, which is derived from the word mayin, which means to close one's lips or eyes. And during the Middle Ages, guilds of masonry were called mysteries. So mysteries is actually synonymous with the word crafts. So whenever someone had a craft or a trade, they were called mysteries. So whether they were masons building buildings, or whether they were shoemakers, or people who worked with iron, goldsmiths, and things of that nature, uh, they were all called mysteries or crafts. And then in each of these guilds or mysteries, they would have initiates, and these initiates were known as mysties. And they also had a guide whenever they entered or were initiated into the mysteries, known as mystagogos. Um, so that's the background on just the word mysteries and where they come from. Now, throughout the history of Greece and Rome, of course, there were a number of different mysteries that were known, um, like the Eleusinian mysteries, the Bacchic mysteries, the Samothracian mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, Dionysian mysteries, the Corbantes, and also we had mysteries associated with Egypt, like the Isis mysteries, and mysteries associated with Persia, called the Mithraic mysteries. And so in each of these mysteries, there were two levels. And this is in line with their sort of Hermetic principle. We can talk about Hermes later as well. As above, so below. So they had the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. Well, lesser mysteries, in the lesser mysteries, this was the basic of initiation, and it required, an extensive background check into their moral life, and also some bit of a hazing process. Also, once they're inducted into these lesser mysteries, this is where they study earthly phenomena. So this is where they study their different crafts like agriculture, seafaring, botany, chemistry, medicine, physics, and all of that. Um, and it's important to note that all these sciences have to do with the the world, the world that we live in, the earth, and things of that nature. However, there was also the greater mysteries, and this was only for a minority of initiates from the lesser mysteries. So, if sometimes they could just stay in the lesser mysteries and they have their work, and they knew how to, plant crops and things like that. However, if they really, were qualified, then they would graduate into the greater mysteries. And so they would be the people who would be considered high priests and rulers of their society. And in addition to that, they study celestial phenomena that influence the earthly phenomena. So this is really where they got into astrology, meteorology, geomancy, alchemy, metaphysics, and so on. And if you know something about these sciences, I mean, in Arabic they call them all another fi nujum. Um, so this has to do with the sky and looking at the stars in order to predict future events, for instance, like meteorology. I mean, meteorology, we know as the science of telling the weather right now, and it's not really that much of a mystical thing to us. But this is something that was debated in ancient times. Um, particularly within Islam, you know, it fell under the science of another finujum. So being able to tell the weather, being able to manipulate the weather and things like that, that was part of the greater mysteries. Now, let me just skip and talk about the Sabians or the Sabiun in the Qur'an. Now, we have a lot of people on the internet, or maybe not a lot of people, but certain people on the internet who want to talk about Sabians, and um, they get it completely wrong. Now, the Sabians is not the people of Saba or Sheba, which is mentioned in the 34th chapter of the Quran. This is a different word with a different root. The Sabi'un, as we can see here, um, which I'll read in Arabic momentarily, uh, it starts with the Sa, whereas the word Saba starts with the Sin. It's a completely different letter. It has a different root, and it refers to Sheba, the people of southern Yemen. Um, so I wanted to make that clarification, and I can talk about that more extensively if I have any questions later. But the Sabi'un are mentioned 3 times in the Quran. The first one is in Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah of the Quran, in verse 62. And it reads, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالصَّابِئُونَ وَالنَّصَارَى مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ واليوم الآخر وعمل صالحا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. So that's in Surah Al-Baqarah. It has the same reading in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th chapter of the Quran, in verse 69. إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والصابئون والنصارى من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وعمل صالحا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. And then the third time the Sabi'un are mentioned in the Quran, it's in Surah Al-Hajj in verse 17 with a slightly different reading. إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والصابئين والنصارى والمجوس والذين أشركوا إن الله يفصل بينهم يوم القيامة إن الله على كل شيء شهيد. So if we were to look at the translations of these verses, it says, indeed, those who have believed in the Prophet Muhammad, and this is related to the tafsir of these verses, and those before him who Jews or Sabians or Christians, those among them who believed in Allah and the last day and did righteousness, no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve. And then for the verse in Surah Al-Hajj, it's translated as, indeed, those who have believed and those who were Jews and the Sabians and the Christians and the Magians and those who are associated with Allah, Allah will judge between them on the day of resurrection. Indeed, Allah is over all things a witness. I don't want to go too deep into the meanings of these words. We can get into that subsequent um, lectures, I guess. But according to many of the exegetes and jurists on the Quran, the people that are discussed here, the Sabi'un, they were people who were based in southern Iraq. They were monotheists who pray and have a scripture. Usually it says something like they pray 3 times a day, and they face, some say they face Mecca, some say they face the south, some say they face the north in their prayers, and they have some sort of scripture. And then others say they direct their worship to the angels, which is very key to understanding who they are. In terms of jurisprudence, Many of these Muslim scholars have said that they cannot marry their women, so they don't classify as the same as the Ahl al-Kitab, the Jews and Christians. Um, so it is prohibited for Muslims to marry their women or eat their food. And I think there's a specific reasoning for that, which I'll talk about as well. Um, and also, the Meccans used to call the early Muslims Sabians or Sabian. Um, and I think this was due to the linguistic meaning of the word Sabi, and not necessarily the terminological meaning of the word. So it wasn't saying that they were from a group of people called the Sabians. They were saying that you convert, that you switch your religion, or something like that. So, and this brings me to, I guess, Muhammad al-Qurtubi's, um, where he talks about the meaning of the word sabah. It means to leave, meaning to leave one's religion, or to rise like a star, or sometimes to appear in a certain place like the tooth of a child. It's called sabah. So this is the span of a person's life when they become a sabi. It means they become a small child or a boy or something like that when their first teeth appear. And then Mahmoud al-Zamakhshari, he reinforces this idea that the sabi is the one who has left religion, but particularly they've left the religion of one of the peoples of the book. So they were Jews, and then they switched their religion to something else. Or they were Christians, then they switched their religion to something else. And then Ismail ibn Kathir, um, he also supports the point that this was a mixture of different religions or a syncretic religion, or sometimes a primitive or unknown religion. So in some of the historical texts, like Tabaqat al-Ummam by Sa'id al-Andalusi, so as his name suggests, he lived in Andalus. Um, he has a different conceptualization of the ancient Sabians. He actually says that Sabianism is the religion of the ancient world. So all the nations of the ancient world that he knew of in the Eastern Hemisphere all followed the religion of the Sabians. And he says these he divides them into seven categories: Persia, Chaldea. So Persia really represent all of Persianate um, uh, Asia. So that would mean um, Central or not Western Asia. And then there's Chaldea, uh, which encompass Arabia, Iraq, and Syria. And he says that their language was Syriac. And then Greece um, constitutes all of Europe. The Copts or the Egyptians represent Africa. And then Turkey, they represent Central and North Asia. And then India, um, the Hind and the Sind beyond Persia. And then China, which is beyond India. So just to give you a visual, um, there's a place known as Harran, which is here in Asia Minor. If we're thinking about what George G.M. James articulated concerning the mystery schools, this place Harran has a very interesting history, and within Arabic sources, it is really the headquarters of the Sabi'un. And there are certain figures that come from this place, um, particularly um, um, particularly Thabit ibn Qurra, uh, and his lineage. He becomes he's an I think a physician, a mathematician, and he comes from this ancient Sabian lineage in Harran, but he also ascends to the courts, the imperial courts of the Abbasids, and he's him and his family. They play an essential role in the translation movement, where they translate a lot of the old Greek and Syriac texts, or texts from Greek, from Syriac into Arabic. And then the Sawad, this is the area of southern Iraq where they say the Sabians dwell. And this is the home of the Mandaeans. The Mandaeans are the other group within Islamic sources that is known as Sabians. And then if we take a look, according to Saad al-Andalusia's typology, we can see where everyone else is. So he's saying that all of these people are Sabians. So I state in my book, while the origin of all religions is one, two major factions began to develop over time. One faction, at times known as Hanifs, orthodox, or traditionalists, held on to its original monotheistic creed, and the other, known as Sabians, Gnostics, or spiritualists, innovated ideas that deviated from the creed of monotheism and claimed that God was too transcendent to be worshiped directly and required intercessors by which their worship is transferred to God. This is demonstrated by the Qur'anic verse, Zumar, verse 3, on the tongues of the polytheists who state, "We only worship them to bring us closer to God." So in the Arabic, it reads, "وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا من دونه أولياء ما نعبدهم إلا ليقربونا إلى الله زلفى." So I continue to say, regardless of the language and local religious customs, the aberrated version of the primordial religion became known for its worshipful reverence of the stars and their personification in the form of mythical beings, which Muslims know to be either malaika, angels, or jinn. The followers of these aberrated religions also built megalithic temples and other structures that align with celestial movements and often ornamented with pictorial writings containing doctrine, wisdom, and the stories of kings and queens. They were also known for their scientific explorations and philosophical speculations. Astronomy, the chief of their sciences, aided in their worship of the stars as well as with predictions of future events for agricultural, imperial, and individualized purposes. They often believed in the eternity of the universe and reincarnation and engaged in human sacrifice. This was the case in much of the ancient world. So, understanding this, if you recall when I mentioned, in the greater mysteries, they study, the stars in order. So when they had this knowledge of, the future according to what they knew of astronomy and meteorology and things like that, and they could do these fancy things, they were kind of given more power, and people were amazed with them. And so naturally, you would make these people your kings because they can do extraordinary things. And in addition to that, they could also help you um, develop your agriculture. They can help you stay in power if you were some sort of you're another type of king. So they could predict the outcomes of battles and things of that nature. Um, and also, just for individualized purposes, as we know nowadays, magicians or soothsayers, people who can um, tell you exactly, like, you're going to meet the right person, or uh, what situation, what if you lost anything or whatever it may be. So people use these knowledges nowadays just for those individualized purposes. Although I think maybe behind the scenes, rulers still use the knowledge of the stars to predict certain outcomes. Okay, and then just talking about this dichotomy between the Hanifs and Sabians. Knowledge of this dichotomy has been lost to history due to many factors. The Hanif faction, in the form of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have managed to gain religious and political authority, which has drowned out the perspectives of the Sabian factions, made their practices of calling on spirits and conducting human sacrifices taboo, if not punishable by law, and marginalized their influence in societies where the Hanif doctrines dominate. So this is an important point that I wanted to make. So, if you're, part of the conscious community, or maybe you're not, part of the Black conscious community, but you understand that, there's this perspective about, you know, being spiritual and not religious, and how maybe some people have taken, spirituality, for instance, to mean that they, engage in, they wear crystals, and they're kind of into, astrology and things of that nature. So what what happened over history is that, a lot of these practices that were associated with the Sabians, they weren't all good practices. Um, So they believed in human sacrifice, for instance. Um, like the Bacchic mysteries, um, they engaged in orgies, violent orgies. Um, many of the things that we kind of associate with, um, being disgusting and distasteful, actually were common practices among the Sabians. Um, so eating the flesh of children, um, molesting children, pederasty, and things of that nature. These were all common practices of the Sabians. So, really, what the Hanif factions did, the Abrahamic uh, religions, once they gained control, they did subdue the Sabians, but for good reason. They did it for a good reason. Uh, and this particularly happened under Christianity. And so I've been reading a lot about Gnosticism and its relationship to early Christianity, and how it influenced how they sort of talked about the Bible, and how they formulated their orthodoxy. Um, Interestingly enough, Islam had a different um, approach to Sabianism. Um, at least by the time that Islam was on the scene, Sabianism had already kind of been stomped out by Christianity. Um, and of course, Islam sort of dominated the Sabianism that existed in ancient Arabia. But when they started to encounter the knowledge of the Sabians, they sort of sifted through it, said what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. So they actually took a lot of the Sabian knowledge of their the knowledge of the mystery schools, basically, of agriculture, of different sciences and things like that, and then they Hanifized it, so to speak, and then I guess theologically, philosophically, they debated through a lot of these issues, and this sort of comes to a head with um, Al Ghazali's Imam Hamid al Ghazali's Tahafut al Falasifa, and Ibn Rushd Tahafut, his Fasl Maqal, and his defense of the ancient Sabian knowledge. So, to discuss a little bit about the history of the mysteries, here's my synopsis, and I can get into the details. The details are in the book, um, and I can do it in subsequent um, um, presentations. So, the first one is it's difficult to pinpoint the origins of the ancient mysteries. They go back at least to the 8th century BCE, but of course, you know, um, there's evidence to say that it went back further. And what we know of Judaism and Christianity also challenged the mysteries. So if you read, for instance, the work of the Rambam, Maimonides, he talks about the Sabians. And his perspective is that the the Sabians, well, actually, the religious law of the Jews was a reaction to Sabian practices. So it was corrective of Sabian practices. It's the same, or sometimes it's not the same, but is geared to um, combat or extinguish some of the practices of the Sabians. And then in Christianity, as I said, you know, this phenomenon was called Gnosticism. In early Christianity, um, very early on in Christianity, um, the Gnostics began to, weave their knowledge into Christian language, and sometimes the Christian would retort with the language of the Gnostics. So, at one point in history, Christianity began to use terms like mysterion, mysteries, to talk about, and they still do. Even in Catholicism, they talk about the mysteries, right? But they changed the meaning of it. It doesn't mean the mysteries that we know of those ancient days. Um, but this was a source of many heated debates. Um, you know, Writers such as Augustine and Origen and Justin Martyr, they responded to a lot of these debates or attacks from the Gnostics, who went beyond just sort of, I guess, a pagan understanding of um, of of this ancient pagan understanding of religion, but they philosophized about it, um, and they wove it into sort of cosmology. So you'll find in a lot of the Gnostic works, they start to talk about angels and the demiurge, and how like the angels they might rebel against God. Each one kind of has their own philosophy, but there's always talk about angelology, and also it seems to always come down to the idea of the universe. Um, was the universe itself created, um, or was it created at a particular point in time, or was it always there? Was it eternal? And the chief, person that sort of promoted this idea was Aristotle. As we know, Ibn Rushd, he was the what is it, the great commentator or commenter on Aristotle. So, however, both Judaism and Christianity absorbed aspects of the mysteries. So, it's really my contention that Judaism, as we know it, has its origins in ancient Judah, right? And they at one point in history they had either syncretized their religion or embraced fully the religion of the Babylonians. And then, after their captivity, there were those who wanted to reclaim the religion of their forefathers, of the children of Israel. So uh, by that time in history, the original religion had really been lost. And I think the evidence for this is the fact that uh, so many prophets were sent to them. So the prophets were sent to them because their original religion had been lost in the world, and this culminates with Christianity, with the prophet being sent to them, at least according to Muslims, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, uh, and them rejecting this prophet. And then the mysteries in the Roman world had already been in decline by the 4th century CE. So the rise of Christianity, um, it is correlated with the decline of the mysteries. So, like I said, um, the mysteries, even though in their heyday they probably were really, the institution of religion in the ancient world. They were the religion of the ancient world. However, by the time that Christianity was on the scene, the first 4 centuries, um, prior to um, prior to Christianity really taking over Rome, or Rome embracing Christianity, then the mysteries was kind of in this decline where it was superstitious, it was violent, it was um, gory, it was, um, how do we put it? Uh, it was salacious, and so on. So many of the Roman emperors, they had some issues with the mysteries, uh, even though it was the religion of the time and they were still oppressing Christians. Many of the mysteries were also sort of getting out of hand. Um, and so, with Constantine's conversion in 325, um, he didn't immediately make Christianity the religion of Rome, but he just eases back the persecution of the Christians during that time, and then eventually, really is Theodosius the first who makes Christianity the official religion of Rome. The mysteries were actively shut down from the 4th and 7th century. So there are certain names that pop out: Theodosius the first, Justinian, and Maurice, no relation. So these 3 emperors really kind of took a heavy hand towards any trait of the mysteries of the religion of ancient Rome. So Theodosius, he really sort of saw out this campaign to fight and destroy all the mysteries, but it didn't get rid of them. By the time Justinian came, Justinian's foes were really the Neoplatonists, which comes out of this philosophical milieu that takes the mysteries and sort of, makes it a rival to Christianity. And Justinian, he looks for elements of Neoplatonism within Christianity as well. So he's also taking on other sects of Christianity. And then Maurice, one of the last Roman emperors, not the last, but one of the last, he is said to have persecuted the mysteries in Harran. So, and Maurice died in 602. So by the time this was taking place, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had already been born. Although his mission didn't begin until slightly after that point, uh, this was the environment that was happening in the Middle East during that time. Then we also have to look at Persia. Well, the Persian mysteries were interrupted during the invasion of Alexander, which was in, I think, 300s BCE, prior to Christ. But when Alexander um, conquered Rome, he killed Darius the second, and then he actually looted all of Persia for their manuscripts and everything like that. He defaced their buildings, which had writings and stuff on it, and then he took all these manuscripts back to his city in in Alexandria, which is in Egypt, and then he had them translated into Coptic and Greek, and then he burned the Persian originals. So what's happening in Persia from that time on is that they're trying to rebuild their ancient mysteries. They're trying to reclaim their knowledge. And so the leaders of Persia, successive kings of Persia, they would send for manuscripts that were on the peripheries of their kingdom that existed in China and existed in India and so on. And they would try to solely rebuild their mysteries, their knowledge. And then, so we know that Islam, comes to rise, rises in power in the 7th century, and then eventually, conquers Persia, conquers Rome. But what happens with Persia? Well, actually, in both places, um, the Muslims do notice, the Arab Muslims, they notice that uh, there is this intellectual life that's going on, and so they really fund and support this intellectual revival, uh, knowledge of the ancient mysteries. They're taking it out of Greek and Syriac and Persian and Hindi and all these various languages and translating them into Arabic. And so this is really the project of the Abbasids, um, who were very, very interesting if you think about them. They are mostly Persian influence. Um, so they were Arabs, but then they had children by a lot of Persian women, and so they really sort of seeped into the Persian culture a lot. And if you even looked at uh, some of the stories of these Abbasid caliphs, for instance, Jafar Mansur, he was very much into astrology. Um, and in fact, he employed the Ali Nobach. It's actually said that this person, I think Sahel ibn Nobach, is it Nobach himself or Sahel ibn Nobach? I have to clarify later, but um, he, I guess, when Ja'far ibn Mansur was in jail, in prison, there was this Zoroastrian with him. I think it was Noba, and this he was an astrologer, and he predicted that he would be, king in the land someday. And so Ja'far ibn Mansur said, if you're correct, and I'll seek you out, basically. And so eventually, yes, he did become the caliph or the king, the leader of the time, and he employed the Abbasids, the early Abbasids. They employed this family, the descendants of Ali Nobach, as the court astrologers. Um, and they also, many of the Abbasid caliphs, they founded um, um, Beit al-Hikmah. Um, they they funded translations, and they also um, embraced the Mu'tazilite theology, which is heavily influenced by ancient Greek thought. Um, and so, when we look at the history of Islam, um, we start to see, the effects of the ancient mysteries start to seep in. And so, um, there was a conflict between the Mu'tazilites and the so-called traditionalists or Ahl al-Hadith. And it comes to a head with Ahmed ibn Hanbal and what we call the Mihna. Um, so I'm just narrating this to you because I think if we start to look at the history of Islam and Christianity and Judaism through this lens, Sabians, the Gnostics, and things like that, we'll get a fuller picture. We'll get a more realistic picture of what these religious conflicts were all about. Like I said, I will mention something about Hermes. So Hermes, um, for a lot of the Sabians and the Gnostics and the mysteries, is sort of like their main prophet. Um, and Hermes Trismegistus is talked about a lot of different works. Of course, there's a whole line of works called the Hermetica that supposedly go back to Hermes. Now, interestingly enough, I think actually the concept of Hermes, um, the way we know about it in English is through Arabic. Although it goes back to several traditions in Persia and Rome and so on. But Hermes in Arabic, as it's called, al-Muthallith bin Ni'mah. Trismegistus is the that's the translation with Trismegistus, which means that he is triple endowed. He has triple blessings. And so Hermes, there's a lot of theories about Hermes. They say, was he from Babylon or was he from Egypt? Okay, was he one person or sort of like a conglomeration of different personalities? Um, in ancient Egypt, he's known as the Tehuti, and then in the Bible, or he's known as Enoch or Enoch, and in the Quran and Arabic sources, he's known as Idris. So all of these people are just kind of like one person, or maybe a conglomerate of people. But to the Sabians, particularly the Sabians of Harran, as well as the Mandaean Sabians, they see Hermes as one of their main prophets. And so, who knows if they're trying to use the terminology of the Hanifs in terms of prophets, uh, or was it really the fact that he brought this knowledge to them, and maybe they corrupted it later on or whatever? Okay, just to give you a timeline of events, and this timeline actually appears in my book. I show you how closely the Prophet Muhammad lived to the time of the closure of the ancient mysteries. So here we have Justinian, Justinian, who dies in 565. He's expelling Neoplatonists, right? In 527, right? And then Chosroes the first in Persia, he dies in 579. He is seeking to reconstruct the Persian mysteries. And then we have a plague that breaks out throughout the Middle East at the time, um, and it really slows things down because a lot of people are dying, um, and yeah, there's a lot of conflict going on. Actually, at the time, there's the Slavs coming from Eastern Europe, and they're basically attacking the Roman Empire, and it's very difficult for the Roman Empire to manage them. Um, so they kind of pay them a fee to sort of keep them off. Um, and there's a lot of things that are happening in the world. But there's a decline, and there's this constant struggle between Persia and Rome, and that's usually where the biography of the Prophet Muhammad starts. So Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is born around 570, uh, and this is where Ethiopia attacks Mecca. And so we have to know that actually Ethiopia um, was very much influenced by Justinian, and they embraced the Christianity of Rome. And so they wouldn't have been friends with any, Sabian leaning people at this time. Nevertheless, at the time, Ethiopia is actually occupying uh, Yemen. And we know the story about uh, there's a particular there's an Arab who defiles um, the church that is built by one of the Ethiopians there. And so Abraha, he leads his army through the desert to attack Mecca. And through a miraculous series of events, he does not come out victorious. Although he has elephants, he has the capability to squash them, he doesn't. And so Mecca is kind of seen as this safe haven for pagans, for um, I guess differing factions of Christians. So there's Christians in Arabia at the time, but they never established a church. They they have they have they're just monks, freelancing monks basically. Um, and when I in my book I talk a little bit about who they might be. In addition, we have some Jews that are there, or people that call themselves Jews, and Sabians. So we have a lot of different elements in Arabia. So contrary to popular belief, Arabia is actually, sort of this mosaic of religious thought at the time. In addition to all of these things, we also have, the Kaaba in Mecca, and the Kaaba in Mecca is really where it all comes together. So they have 360 idols. The idols, they're coming from different areas of 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 the Near East. Also, they have a picture of Jesus, mother, the Mary and Jesus. inside of the Kaaba. So, it's really accepting of all these various religions. And then, the Prophet Muhammad pops up. And also, the Emperor Maurice, he's persecuting the Harranian pagans um, in 590, around 590, and he's eventually executed in 602. He's actually executed by his own military um, due to some internal politics, right? And then the mission of the Prophet Muhammad starts um, some 10 years after his death, and then the Muslims migrate from Mecca to Medina in 622, and then the Prophet Muhammad he dies. He dies in 632, and Mecca accepts Islam. Um, and then I guess not too long after that, the Roman general leader Heraclius dies. He loses pretty much all of his territories to the Muslims. So Heraclius actually he responded violently to one of the letters of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so he lost his kingdom. And then very shortly after that, the the Persians also lost their kingdom. And then we have the Khulafa Rashidun, we have the Umayyads, and so on. Um, but then the Abbasids, they come on the scene around 750. And this is, shortly after that, that's where they begin the translation movement. So this is kind of what I think. The mystery schools, they kind of had various forms, but they all come from the ancient mysteries. So the Chaldeans, the Sabians, the Hanifs, even the Yahud philosophers, Sara, Majus, they kind of come from the same ancient mystery milieu. Okay, so with regards to my theoretical argument, uh, Sabians versus Hanifs. So it's important to know that these are typologies. As I see it, the Quran expressing in these verses mostly typologies. So alladina hadu, so uh, alladina amanu, walladina hadu, wal nasara, wal sabi'un, wal majus. These are all typologies. Yes, they're related to certain people that believe these things, but these are also types of belief. But Allah says that man amana billahi wal yawm al-akhiri, so whoever believes in Allah and by extension the messenger that taught them about Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and if they believe in him the right way, um, meaning they don't associate anything with him. Um, they don't worship angels or stars, or they don't bow down to idols and things of that nature. Uh, then, inshallah, they won't have any fear, nor will they grieve. Um, Also, they have to believe in the last day. So, Yom Al Qiyamah, this idea of believing in the last day, uh, it is antithetical to the idea of the eternity of the universe. Um, because people that believe in the eternity of the universe, they tend to believe in that time is cyclic in the sense that, people will not be held responsible for what they do, um, or maybe, their responsibility will sort of, um, you know, revolve into another life. So, they believe in reincarnation and things like that. So, they don't necessarily believe that there'll be a final judgment. They don't believe in a heaven and a hell, Jannah, Firdaus, or an Jahannam, or Jahim, or Sa'ir, or any other term like that. So, Sabians and Hanifs, who are they? They're from one source. They're from one source. Um, they're from the Chaldeans, which we know as the Chaldeans of Iraq. And these are the people of Abraham. Uh, so we know that the people of Abraham, they live their life by the stars, specialize in astrology. Even throughout Greece and Rome, a Chaldean was known as an astrologer. So when you said the word Kasdim or Chaldean, that meant astrologer. And then we know that their place of origin was southern Iraq, okay, the same place where the Mandaeans live. And we should note that Ibrahim, alayhi salam, he was known to have traveled um, to the city of Harran, which is in present-day Turkey, traveled to Egypt and Arabia. So he traveled to all these places that were known for Sabianism. And my book kind of starts off heavy in the introduction, where I really kind of go into a tafsir of Surat al-An'am, verses 74 to 83. And I'll just talk about that in brief. So here are the verses with قال إبراهيم لأبيه آزر أتتخذ أصناما آلهة إني أراك وقومك في ضلال مبين وكذلك نري إبراهيم ملكوت السماوات والأرض وليكون من الموقنين فلما جن عليه الليل رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لا أحب الآفلين فلما رأى القمر بازغا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لئن لم يهدني ربي لأكونن من القوم الضالين فلما رأى الشمس بازغة قال هذا ربي هذا أكبر فلما أفلت قال يا قوم إني بريء مما تشركون إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين. صدق الله العظيم. So in um, these verses are about Ibrahim, alayhi salam, and his people. Particularly when he uh, calls out to his father, uh, which is known here as Azar. Uh, do you take asnaman aliha? Do you take um, idols as gods? Inni araka wa qawmaka fi dalalin mubin. Uh, Verily, I see you and your people as in clear misguidance. وكذلك نري إبراهيم ملكوت السماوات والأرض. As such, we have shown, or we show Ibrahim uh, the malakut of the samawati wal ard. So the malakut um, is what is behind the physical world. So he shows him the malakut, what is behind the heavens and the earth. وَلِيَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ. In order for him to be of those who are certain, who have certainty. So it gets into this story. It's a very interesting story, where he sees where the night falls, he sees um, stars or planets, and he says, "This is my Lord." When they dissipate, he says, "I don't like those that dissipate." And then he sees the moon. He sees the moon shining. He says, "This is my Lord." فلما أفل قال لئن لم يهدني ربي لأكونن من القوم الضالين. So when the moon also dissipates, he says, if my Lord doesn't guide me, then surely I will be of the people who are astray. And then he sees the sun shining bright. He says, "This is my Lord, this is greater." And then when it dissipates, he says, "Oh, my people, I am free of what you associate with." And then he says, "Inni wajahtu wajhi," I have turned my face to the one who has originated the heavens and the earth as a Hanif. وَمَا أَنَا مِن مُشْرِكِينَ, I am not of the polytheists. So what are we supposed to get from these verses? I mean, usually exegetes um, they describe these verses, um, as saying that this was some sort of um, this is some sort of exploration that Abraham was going through before he got his prophethood. Um, but I don't see it that way, and I'll tell you why. So, in, in the first of these verses, he points out to his father. He asks him, rhetorically, "Do you take idols as God?" And he says, "I see you in clear error." So why would he see him and see his father and his people in clear error and then sort of turn around and do the same thing? I don't think that is what is intended by these verses. And then it says, "Such we have shown Ibrahim what is behind the heavens and the earth." So the dominions of the heavens and the earth, in order for him to have certainty. So I think this verse is actually key here for us to understand that God is showing Abraham something that is not shown most people. That's the malakut, what is behind the dominion of the heavens and the earth. Why? So that he can walk away assured as a prophet. Okay, so he's given prophecy. In order for him to be given prophecy, he has to have this yaqeen, this certainty. And then, we go into the story about when the night falls, him seeing the stars, saying, "This is my Lord." Okay, so um, I guess on the apparent meaning of this, he sees it. He says that the stars, the moon, the sun are his Lord. But if you understand, in the Arabic language here, actually, that's not exactly what he's saying. There's something called the idmar, which is an ellipsis that is here. So there's something that's not mentioned when he says this. Um, so he's not saying that the sun is his Lord, or the moon is his Lord, or the stars is his Lord. He's saying that this is the handiwork of my Lord, for instance. Or he's saying that this is the sign of my Lord, and so on. And we can know this if we look at the last one, Shems. Shems is feminine, okay? It says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً. So he adds a ta marbuta, this ta marbuta to indicate that the Shams, that the sun is feminine. But then right after that, he says, "Qala هذا ربي, هذا أكبر. So in the Arabic language, we know if we refer to something as feminine, we have to say هذه ربي or هذه أكبر. But that's not what he says. Um, so this indicates that it's not the son that he's talking about. Rather, it is something else. Okay. Um, this is my understanding of this story. And then in the end, he says, I have turned my face to the one who has originated the heavens and the earth as a Hanif. Now, I purposely don't translate this word Hanif um, because um, you know we actually need to understand what a Hanif is. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Now, everyone knows, you know, someone who's reading the Quran, who might be familiar with the Bible, they know that Ibrahim or Abraham alayhi salam was not of the polytheists. So why does he need to clarify this? Um, so in one aspect, the person who is a Hanif, they actually turn their face, or they only worship the one who originated the heavens and the earth and nothing else. And also, they are not polytheists. So a Hanif is not a polytheist and someone who worships uh, the originator of the heavens and the earth. Um, and this is in contrast to a Sabian. So he puts himself in contrast to the people that do associate partners, particularly the stars, the sun, and the moon, with God, or some idol. Okay. Now, if we kind of put ourselves in 7th century Arabia, uh, there was probably a lot of talk about Abraham being a polytheist. Um, and in Mecca, the Kaaba, that uh, even the Meccans hold was built by Ibrahim or Abraham alayhi salam, but they changed the doctrine or whatever, and they allow idols to go into the house that Abraham built. Perhaps with the understanding that um, they were calling him a polytheist or someone who would have been accepting of polytheism. Um, and also, if we look into Mandaean literature, they have these counter narratives about some of the prophets. Among them is Ibrahim, who they say he um, he had a personal demon or something like that called Yorba that he followed and listened to, and this spirit, you know, forced him to circumcise himself. And within the Sabian, doctrine, religion, things like that, someone who is missing part of their body is considered impure, and therefore they cannot be a high priest. They said that Abraham alayhi salam had aspirations to being a high priest. And so after he did this, he was disqualified from it and he had to leave. And he said in order for him to get revenge, he he would lay on the side of the road with his, indigent people, lepers and so on, and they would forcibly circumcise the Sabians, uh, you know, the other people. So in that counter narrative, we get a sense of how they saw Ibrahim. And perhaps this was the dominant view of Abraham during the time of the prophet, which he corrected. Okay, so the Hanifs are those who follow the way of Abraham, Milat Ibrahim. Uh, and this is very simple, that they saw God as a personal deity who intervened in the affairs of men, and he wasn't just, yes, he was transcendent, but he wasn't just a transcendent deity that was uninterested with the affairs of people. Also, Hanifs believe in prophets. They believe that there are people who are chosen by God, um, to teach a certain way, to have a law and things of that nature. But um, the Sabians believe that there were sages, people who could purify themselves and come to enlightenment on their own merits. Um, I believe the um, the author Robert Grant, who says that um, the Sabians or the Gnostics, they had a self-centered religion, whereas the Orthodox, the Hanifs, they had a God-centered religion. And then another aspect of the Hanifs was that they rejected uh, worship of nature, idols, stars, planets, and angels. Uh, whereas the Gnostics, the Sabians, they always mix that in there. Um, and also the Hanifs, they believed that the universe was created by God rather than it being eternal and uncreated, and perhaps, um, you know, created by a demiurge or some sort of God that was uninterested. He just left the universe on its own. I mean, there's a lot of different beliefs within Sabian thought and Gnostic thought. Um, but yeah, generally, if you find people arguing for the eternal, the eternity of the universe, then they're usually Sabian meaning. Uh, then we also have to mention the classification that was set up by Muhammad al-Shahrastani in his book Milal wa Nihl. And these are the problematic origins of Sabian beliefs. So Shahrastani, he's actually from somewhere in Central Asia, but uh, he lived in the 13th century, and he actually traveled to Hajj, and he traveled to Baghdad where he studied and taught for several years. And he said while he was there, he read the books of the Sabians, and this is what he got out of it. He said that there's different stages in Sabian thought. The first one is the Ruhaniyat, spiritualism. And in this stage, this is where they took angels as intermediaries to God. So they said that um, God was uninterested with creation, um, or maybe people, they couldn't approach him with their worship directly. So they had to take angels as intermediaries. And they also reasoned that the angels are more worthy of the worship of man because they play a more active role in uh, the lives of people and creation. So there's an angel for everything, um, for the sun, for the stars. There's angels behind all these different things. There's angels for rain, angels for that for trees and all sorts of things. But then they said the next stage is star worship. But they said that the planets and the stars were actually the physical representations of angels. And so they direct their worship to the stars with the understanding that these represent angels. And then they got into idol worship, okay? Because it said that they said they have to be able to see, the things that they worship. And the stars being the physical bodies of angels, they had to in certain seasons, for instance, you don't see certain stars, you don't see the moon during the day, usually you don't see the sun at night. So what do you do when these things are not visible? So what they did was create idols on earth. Well, they created structures that corresponded with certain positions of the stars, and then they placed images and idols inside of them and worshiped them when these things were not uh, seen. And then another stage in their belief was the stage of reincarnation, which they deduced that any recompense, any sort of reward or punishment for worldly deeds would be meted out in the physical realm based on the fact that time is cyclical and it repeated, forever and infinitum. Then they also believe in pantheism. So in this stage, they believe that man is part of God, or a person can kind of ascend to reach the level of a god or something like that. Well, these are the problematic stages of Sabian beliefs, according to Muhammad Shahrastani. So I was going to talk a little bit about Sabians in pre-Islamic Arabia. Of course, we know that the different tribes, they worship different celestial bodies. As we can see here, Himyar worship the sun, Kinana worship the moon, Taim, they worship the Aldebaran, um, Lachem and Judam, they worship the Mushtari, which is Jupiter, and so on. So we see that many of the tribes, they had their patron uh, celestial god. Okay. So I guess, what is my theory here? So one is that, just to kind of wrap up, Sabianism is an ancient astrological religion. That Abraham actually reformed Sabianism in his time. His followers were called Hanifs. Uh, the Near Eastern religions, they kind of lay on a continuum between Sabianism and Hanifism. So, these religions like Alladina Hadu, Yahud, Nasara, Majus, even things like Samaria, uh, the religions of the Samaritans, and so on. Like they kind of lay on this continuum between Sabian and Hanif. And I also, and I discussed this in greater length in the book, saying that the Nasara were actually a priestly class of Sabians, or maybe of the Nasara persuasion. Uh, I can, go into my reasoning for that uh, maybe in another lecture. But some ascribe to unreformed Sabianism, uh, and some to Hanifism. So some of the Nasara were Hanifs, some of the Nasara were Sabians. And then the Yahud were like the Hanifs or Jews, but some of them also subscribed to Sabian thought. The Majus were like the Sabians, but some of them kind of ascribed to the more Hanif teachings of Zoroaster. And that when we look in the Quran, Allah is actually rebuking um, those who adopted some of these problematic Sabian beliefs. So I want us to think about this. I want us to really um, ponder if you look at the Sabians through the lens that I've presented here, you know, it I think it makes sense, and it gives us a different view of religious history, religious conflict, and also, um, it gives us a deeper insights into reading the Quran, the Bible, and so on. So when we read these religious texts, we have this dichotomy, we have this theory in mind, so that we can uh, really come to terms with what the texts are saying. So I'll end it right here. Um, this time I'll do a follow up. Uh, yeah, I'll do a follow up. Maybe going into some details. Let me know if you have any specific questions. Um, Hopefully, I can get into the answers for you. Thank you for watching and subscribe. Thank you.